So we are on Wicca and Witchcraft for Dummies, chapter 5. I believe this is part 3 because this chapter is quite large, so forgive me if there's a lot to go through. So we were about to discuss whether or not there was an actual organized religion called Wicca or witchcraft. That's a more difficult question to answer. So some researchers believe that witchcraft was an organized religion that was invented by the Catholic Inquisition during the great witch hunts of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. We're going to get into that in a minute. According to the witch hunters, witches worshipped and served Satan. Proponents of this theory believe that the invention of witchcraft was either a mass delusion by members of the church who fervently believed in Satan's power to deceive humankind, or a deliberate ploy by the church and the government to persecute people for political and social reasons. Other people, including Margaret Murray, believe that Wicca and witchcraft were organized pre-Christian religions of Europe. So some people are saying basically that nature magic and nature workings were not officially called witchcraft until the church got involved and started to label it as witchcraft in order to put a negative connotation on it. But Margaret Murray believes that Wicca and witchcraft were organized pre-Christian religions of Europe. So she's got a bit of a different stance. So within Wicca, there are people that support Margaret Murray's stance and some people who do not. I will give you both sides and let you know which is the side that I choose. So back in 1921, Margaret Murray published a book called The Witch Cult in Western Europe. In this book, she argued that witchcraft was the universal, organized, pre-Christian religion of Europe. This ancient religion survived across Europe until early modern times. Now, she based this argument based off of the witch trial documents of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So she's writing this book based on that information. So Murray believed that the ancient witches worshipped a horned god, which the Christians of the Inquisition claimed to be their Satan. But our horned god wasn't Satan. He was just a goat deity, a man-goat deity who represented nature and fertility and spring and all of those things. But because of this, that's why witches were accused of Satan worship. She called the ancient religion the Dianic cult because the female form of this god was Diana, who some say was the queen of the witches. Some people say Diana is the earth mother. Some people say Diana is the moon. It all depends on what you believe. So because she claimed that witches were worshiping a horned god, even though the female god was Diana, they were basically saying that the male deity still dominated the religion, so that they were worshiping Satan or the male god. That's not what Wicca's about. And we want to keep this in perspective because Murray's witch cult actually had come from a British race of small people now known as the fairies, and we will talk about the fairies later on. She says that the witch cult celebrated 8 festivals every year, or sabbats, and minor events, or esbats. They organized themselves into small covens of 13 people. Now, researchers have been attacking her scholarship for decades. They're saying that she assumed that the confessions of the accused in the witch trials were true, when in reality, the victims of the trials were often tortured until they would say anything to stop the pain. We're going to get into some of those methods. So a lot of researchers do accept that small pockets of the ancient pre-Christian religions did survive into modern times in various areas of Europe. They acknowledge that these isolated groups may have retained fragments of the old rituals and practices. However, they don't accept Murray's idea of an organized and widespread pre-Christian religion that remained intact throughout history. Because Murray also showed no documentation for her claims about the religion or the sabbats or the covens and so on, and scholars say that these terms were created by the Inquisition during the witch trials. Okay, so that was the belief system of Margaret Murray and her writings. Now we've got Charles Leland. He was from 1824 to 1903. He was an American writer who believed that the craft survived from ancient times. His works, kind of like Murray's, had a big influence on the modern Wiccan revival, especially Aradia, Gospel of the Witches, which was done in 1890 but reprinted in 1974. He was an author from the United States. He was lived an adventurous life. He was a political radical, an abolitionist, and a folklorist. So his belief about Wicca is that he claimed he knew a woman, Maddalena, who was from an old witch family of Italian heritage, and she provided him with the family's book of magic, or probably their book of spells. The book tells the story of Diana, queen of the witches, and her union with Lucifer, who was the god of the sun, not the Christian god Lucifer, not Christian Satan. This mating produced a daughter named Aradia. Okay, so Aradia went to Earth to teach witchcraft to the peasants so they could use the magic against the ruling class and raise themselves out of poverty. The term old religion probably originated with Leland's books. Leland maintained that women were treated equally with men in the old craft, and he remains popular with many feminist Wiccans, like me. He is not at all popular with scholars, however, and they have dismissed his books as bunk because he provides no documentation beyond his claim that Madalena was a practitioner who shared her knowledge with him. Now, when I say I agree with Leland, I don't mean that I agree with the fact that he thinks he spoke to one Italian woman and that was therefore the be-all, end-all of what Wiccan religion, the Wiccan religion stands for. But I do agree with him that women were treated equally as men in the culture because it was always a yin and yang. It was always a balance between the male and female energies. And if you even look at a lot of indigenous cultures, women were revered at that time of the month. They were placed into tents and protected by the people around them. So we talked about Murray and we talked about Leland. Now we'll talk about Robert Graves. He is a British writer who promoted the idea that the craft existed in Britain from ancient times, and he claimed that several of the old covens survived. His book, The White Goddess, also influenced the modern Wiccan revival. Graves's writings about the great goddess are poetic and inspirational, but few people view the book as a work of scholarship. So Wiccans differ in their opinions of Murray, Leland, and Graves and about the historical timeline of the craft. However, they take the period of the great witch hunts very seriously. All three of them do. So the term witch hunt today is being used to mean the organized search for, investigation, harassment, or persecution of people who are perceived as a threat because of their unpopular views or behavior. Witch hunts are a form of societal hysteria, and during these times of panic, authorities violate human rights and perpetrate injustice in the name of protecting the greater good. Now, the term witch hunt came from an actual time in history, a profoundly horrifying and tragic era that had an immeasurable effect on human development and continues to influence society today. Because even though I have a pentacle on my arm and triple moons under here, and even though all the talking that we've talked about Wicca and how wonderful and positive energy is, I have people still think that I'm a devil worshiper because I have a pentacle on my arm. I actually had a previous employer once decide to get smart, and because it was really hot out one day, he's like, "Can't you people go make it rain or something?" So yeah, we still hear about it. So I'm going to read this out loud because I don't want to get it wrong. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, many thousands of people in Europe were accused of being witches, and they were tortured and they were murdered. This time has been called the Great European Witch Hunt, the Great Hunt, or the Burning Times. You may hear Wiccans use the phrase, "never again the burning." Although most of the accused were probably not witches at all, Wiccans honor the victims of the witch hunts, and many Wiccans feel a deep obligation to ensure that such persecution can never happen again. So you wonder why we watch what's going on the other side of the world, and you wonder why the witches are standing up, because our empathy is on overload right now. We can feel the pain in the collective consciousness, and we want it to stop. So they call the burning the times, but it's not actually an appropriate term because alleged witches were tortured and executed in a variety of ways in addition to being burned at the stake. They were beaten. They were crushed with stones. They were drowned because if we tied a rope to a piece of rock and put you in the water and you drown, if you drowned, you were innocent. But if you lived, it was because you were a witch, and then they would burn you at the stake. Either way, you didn't make it. There was hangings. There was grape and SA, there was sleep deprivation, there was starvation, there was stretching on a rack, there was suffocation, and there was thumb screws. And a lot of these exact same techniques were used in slavery as well. When we speak of the deaths, we speak of those included who died as a result of their imprisonment, or those who died as a result of the tests used to determine guilt or innocent. For example, when held underwater, the witch is able to stay alive, as well as those who were actually executed. So historians know that the Great Hunt did occur. The fact of that is indisputable. Where, when, how, and why the witch hunts happened are hotly debated amongst Wiccans themselves, amongst scholars, and between Wiccans and non-Wiccans. It's a subject that sparks strong emotions from many people. In recent years, the amount of available information about this brutal era in human history has grown substantially. This section offers some of the general theories about the Great European Witch Hunt. Now, I also need to remind you that this book was created in 2005. So this book itself is 20 years old. Gonna need to do another part. If you're not following me already, please do like and share.